Wonderful. Hello and welcome. I'm Amber DeVillers, one of the Equity Symposium committee members, and this is Conceptualizing Place, publication on tribal alliances to restore salmon habitat, presented by Daytime Olympia faculty Alex McCarty in 3D Studio Art and Native Studies, and Zoltan Grossman in Geography and Native Studies. And we're joined by students from the fall and winter program, Conceptualizing Place, Pacific Northwest, Native Art and Geographies. We're excited to see you here at this year's Equity Symposium. And we want to remind you that the assessment will be coming out at the end of the symposium to your email. Those of you who participate in the assessment will go into a drawing for these awesome DIOP masks. DIOP is a Black-owned business out of Detroit that has helped us stock the Basic Needs Center with masks. I also want to remind everyone that if you have not yet registered for the Equity Symposium or know someone who is not yet registered, it's not too late. You can visit the Equity Symposium webpage to register, and we will send you the full schedule with access to all of the live sessions. Now I would like to welcome our presenters.
Good morning, everybody. We're honored to be here today, and we'd like to raise our hands to all the local folks that are here with us today, as well as people that are zooming in from afar. And so, to start off this presentation of this amazing book that our students wrote over the fall and winter quarters, I thought I could start with a piece that I wrote. And so I'm going to go ahead and read it. Across Pacific Northwest Coast Native nations, there are many different stories about Raven. Some of them depict Raven as a trickster. Others show Raven as a helper, protector, and provider. One story that comes to mind for this book is about when Raven found the first humans in a clamshell after a great flood. Raven decided that he needed to protect the humans and help them survive in this new world. He knew exactly what to do to help them. He picked up the clamshell with his claws and flew up into the sky and soared along the edge of the coastline. He began dropping humans at the mouth of each river he flew over, knowing that they would be able to enjoy the abundance of food provided by these rivers. That is why Pacific Northwest Native communities live at the mouth of each river today. And so this is the cover of the book that our students wrote and self-published through Adobe InDesign. And so to give you kind of a background of the work that we're doing, I wanted to share about the program itself that helped it all happen. And so during the fall and winter quarters of our 2021 academic year, Zoltan Grossman and I taught Conceptualizing Place, which was a program that covered themes relating to the historical and contemporary Native relationship to place and synthesized art, geography, and Native studies. This was actually the second time this program was taught. Our original plan was for students to visit, interact, and do collaborative work with Indigenous and First Peoples communities throughout Washington and Vancouver Island and discuss their research in podcasts that they were going to make in our Evergreen Sound studios. However, due to COVID-19 protocols, we had to reassess our program work and provide meaningful learning experiences for students under remote learning guidelines. And so during the fall quarter, students learned to create art and maps using Adobe Illustrator. Through cultural art appreciation and visual literacies, students learned to create local influence designs that honored First Nations of the Pacific Northwest. Students also learned to tell stories through cartography and created maps about watersheds they researched in case studies. during the winter, students began working on this book in teams where they worked together to tell the unique stories of local watersheds. Each group of 2 to 3 students were in charge of writing their watershed chapters and self-published their chapter layouts through Adobe InDesign. Students also learned about Coast Salish design to honor artistic practices of local tribal nations of the Puget Sound. We had the opportunity for guest artist Joe Seymour to present to our class and visit with us and share about his work. And we have the opportunity to showcase his work on the cover of this publication. And so this is the artist statement that Joe Seymour speaks to this amazing piece about the great blue heron. By superimposing the image of Spetwa over the 1890 map of Olympia, I wanted to show that even though the land around present-day downtown Olympia has been altered, nature still exists in the area that it wants to go back to its original state. This old map of Olympia shows what downtown looked like before it was filled in and what the Deschutes River looked like before the fish dam was installed on the Fifth Avenue Bridge. By showing what the river looked like before, I'm hoping that people can see what it can look like again. Once the fish dam is removed and Capitol Lake is drained, it's my dream to bring back the estuary to the mouth of the Deschutes and let nature return to its original state. And so this piece really encapsulates all of the work and all of the themes that we focused on in this book. And so this is some of his most current monumental work that is on the views on Fifth Apartment Complex downtown. And it's really amazing to see his work at night. And so we wanted to add that photograph on the right to showcase that. And so for this book, our students produced 42 original student artworks or maps, both of which were visual narratives of watershed stories. Zoltan and I look forward to having the opportunity to share their outstanding work with you today. And so this is the list of the works. And so folks will have an opportunity to take time to read through this publication soon. We're working on the final aspects of that. And so I could turn it. Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I'm just going to review some of the contents of the publication, Removing Barriers. It's really a comparative study of dams, dikes, and culverts in different watersheds in the Northwest and their removal or potential removal to restore salmon habitat. So when it comes time to remove the Fifth Avenue Dam near Joe Seymour's artwork in downtown Olympia, we can see precedents. And so this is a map of some of the watersheds. So we're covering a wide variety of watersheds in Western Washington, the Elwha, Nooksack, Chehalis, Skokomish, Chico, Green, Duwamish, Puyallup White, Nisqually, Deschutes, all have different stories. And this artwork, these artworks and maps and the text are ways to tell those stories. And the next slide shows a couple more of the watersheds, the Klamath Basin, which is down in Southern Oregon, Northern California, as well as the kind of subcontinental Columbia Snake Basin, where currently there's controversies, as we'll get into, about the lower Snake River dams. So wanted to point out Parker Wong's beautiful rendition of the life cycle of the salmon, the miraculous journey of salmon from the ocean back to their natal stream. So the original native homelands before the treaties in 1854-55 limited them to reservations. And those homelands, those original homelands, tend to be watersheds. larger areas than the reservations. The treaties guaranteed access to the usual and accustomed places to fish and gather, which tended to be, as the story shows, at the estuaries, at or near the river mouths, where most reservations were situated in Western Washington. So settler colonialism caused a lot of damage: erosion from logging, which silted the salmon's gravel nests, denuding the vegetation, which increased water temperatures, removing beaver dams that had hydrated the landscape, straightening streams into irrigation channels, installing dikes to dry out wetlands, hydroelectric dams that block salmon, road culverts that block salmon. The Bolt decision in 1974 not only reaffirmed the treaty right to harvest fish, but the 1989 Centennial Accord recognized the tribes and states would co-manage the resource, not like in any other state. So there's been a process of watershed restoration, installing log jams for salmon resting places on the Michelle River, remeandering Ohop Creek to a more natural, windy state, removing dikes from the Nisqually Delta cattle pasture to allow tides to freely flow in and out. And all this healing of the watersheds is only made possible by treaty rights and tribal leadership. Actually, if we could go back 2 slides, I think Tristan Glauser's map of the Nisqually Delta, if you stand in the Nisqually River Delta on a misty afternoon, one can observe a landscape that's healing. After decades of being diked to create pasture, tidal flows are again allowed to bring saltwater and aquatic species into old restored channels, kind of like blood circulating back into blocked veins and capillaries in a human body. After decades of being grazed by cattle, riparian vegetation is being brought back to prevent erosion, and sacred springs are being protected and returned to tribal ownership. So all of this healing of the watersheds is only made possible by treaty rights and tribal leadership and authority. So maybe we could go to the first chapter on the dams. So this is Dams, Dikes, and Culverts by Janssen or Shea Helixo and Alex Marroquin. And this is Shea's Coast Sailor spindle whorl. The spindle whorl was used for spinning, and this is a portrayal of the salmon as part of that cycle. There's also a poem here by faculty member Gail Tremblay, dedicated to Warm Springs artist Lillian Pitt, who actually spoke to our class about her people on the Columbia River and the effect of the dams. So the dams not only, next slide, dams not only blocked salmon or frustrated migration, but created stagnant warm reservoirs covering tribal fishing sites. And this is artwork by Alex Marroquin, her of Water, Waves, and Salmon, which is based on designs from her own Purepecha indigenous heritage. So removing a dam is a complex process, next slide, that involves the release of huge amounts of sediment that have been built up over decades, and it can be actually harmful if not done correctly. And Shea's artwork on the right shows that. Removing a dam is a complex process that involves that kind of huge release. Then dikes are built to dry out wetlands, especially in an estuary area, to create farmland and cattle pasture. And removing dikes brings back the tidal flows. Culverts are built under roads and for irrigation channels. The problem is salmon get blocked by debris in the culverts or lose their way in a maze. There's a high fish kill in a culvert. Shea actually went into a culvert to take a photo of both sides for the publication. And in Washington State, the culverts case in federal court cited treaty rights to order the state to repair these culverts. The next chapter is about Nisqually, which I already started to get into, by Vanessa Harris, Tristan Glauser, and Madeleine or Addie Steer. And that tells the story of the Nisqually resistance to the 1854 Medicine Creek Treaty by Leschi and other leaders. This is a portrait of Leschi by Vanessa. And they secured a larger reservation after resistance 2 years later. Vanessa's piece, People of the River, that on the next slide shows kind of the integration, the synthesis of the people's relationship to the river, also to the grasslands. And Nisqually has been a national epicenter of the treaty rights struggle in the 60s and 70s with Billy Frank Jr. So this chapter tells the story of the Nisqually estuary on the next slide. The alliance that resisted a port, the western part in a wildlife refuge that was founded a month before the Bolt decision, the eastern part sold by a white farmer to the tribe in this century, as shown by the detail on Tristan's map on the next slide. The dikes were removed to restore tidal flows, restore that brackish mix of fresh and salt water, that miracle that you can see if you go by at exit 114. So Tristan's watershed map and Addie Steer's texts tells the story of the watershed restoration. The Nisqually tribe has been recognized as the lead entity to develop habitat restoration plans for the federal, state, and local governments to follow. 3/4 of the main stem is actually in protected ownership. This is a national success story of a tribally led alliance to restore a watershed. Also, Addie described 2 upriver dams where the tribe objected to dangerous releases and sued to change practices, and also got a new hatchery. And at the end, Billy Frank Jr. is saying that if that much more needs to be done if the salmon and the people are to survive. As the salmon disappear, so do our tribal cultures and our treaty rights. We are at a crossroads and we're running out of time. So the next one is on Elwha. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next chapter tells another success story, which would be reclaiming a life source is what Annabelle Anderson and Anthony Granberry titled it. They were the authors, and this chapter focuses on a unique success story of the lower Elwha Clallam tribe and their efforts to remove the Elwha River dams. This chapter specifically discusses the Elwha and Glines Canyon dam removals and how the lower Elwha Clallam tribe led an alliance that helped salmon species return and learn how sediment from the removed dams created positive results at the mouth of the river. And this was a huge precedent for our country and the world to be able to see this success, and that even today you can go out to the spit or the mouth of the Elwha River, and you'll find that new clams and shellfish are coming back to those areas. And this is a great map that Annabelle Anderson created for her chapter. And so here's some of the images of the estuary area where all the sediment was able to go down into the mouth of the river and create a new beach that was just rocks before that. And so those two dams were holding back lots and lots of sediment that was released and created this new beach for the Elwha Clallam tribe. And here's some great pieces. This is a piece made by Anthony Granberry. It's titled "The Mouth of the Elwha River. The river braids down like hair into the Salish Sea." It's the title of this piece. And then we also have a guest artist from the Clallam Nation that shared work with us. And so we're really appreciative of that. And so the next chapter tells a very different story. This is chapter 4, the Skokomish, titled Collaborative Restoration of an Obstructed River. This chapter was written by Amanda Flegel and Hunter Herman. This chapter focuses on the challenging story of the Skokomish, the Twana tribe, and their efforts toward removing the 2 dams on the Skokomish River. Their research found concerns about the damages caused by the 2 dams, as well as road building, which creates flooding problems and the blocking of fish migrations. Now, responding to the destructive effects of the dams, the Skokomish tribe sued the city of Tacoma in 1997 to remove these dams. The dams stay today, but they want a settlement to fix the fish passage. Although the dams have yet to be removed, through collaborative efforts and allyship with local organizations, the Skokomish Watershed Action Team, also known as SWAT, was created to restore the Skokomish River habitat. And this is a great piece that Hunter Herman created using Adobe Illustrator that speaks to the needs to remove the Skokomish dams, and to honor the local Skokomish nation. You see this the Skokomish, the Skok dog is represented in the bottom of this piece. And this is a piece that represents the work that's been done to create these artificial resting pools, and so that they're very necessary for the salmon migration. And so that was, showcased in this piece that Hunter created.
The next chapter, Chico Creek, Restoring the Place of the Chum Salmon by Bridget or Bree Marsh Grimm. This is about the Chico Creek small watershed in Kitsap County and Suquamish territory. And it's very much a microcosm of the culverts case, the Martinez decision in 2007 that ordered the state of Washington to remove harmful culverts and install only fish-friendly culverts. This is the only state where that's happening. And this is the story of culverts on State Route 3, right by the estuary, and how the tribe and their neighbors are fixing the culverts. Bree used historical archive photos and interviews with tribal officials to tell this really fascinating narrative of the story that's really still underway. This is an encouraging story of an alliance of the tribe, of the Squamish tribe, and next slide, with fishers who formerly may have opposed treaty rights. The past contention between the sport fishers, commercial fishers, and tribes, but came together with the tribe to restore the fishery. And Bree concludes, by considering the human as well as environmental history behind the restoration of Chico, we contextualize the place of the chum salmon as a place with a unique identity and human connections rather than merely a project or problem to be solved. Working within the Chico Creek watershed will never be complete. Rather, it's a continuing responsibility of stewardship with a long history of deep and complex relationships between people and place, and hopefully a long future as well. And Bree's artwork in Adobe Illustrator depicts a canoe that is also turned into a road with stripes down the middle, kind of that indigenous Western clash of the culvert being restrained in a sense by whistling, trying to whistle through the water, and the chum more or less straining to return. And that road is wading to the non-native side, and it's really the work of people in the estuary that are trying to bring back the chum salmon. The next chapter, White Salmon, Persistence and Removal by Dylan Posos, tells the story of the Condit Dam on the White Salmon River, which is in Yakima territory. It flows into the Columbia. The dam was built in 1913, And Dylan's story is of tribal members that moved to reservations away from the Columbia, but some of the tribal members stayed in what are called in lieu fishing sites right on the river. The dam was removed in a series of explosions in 2011. The fish returned almost immediately within days. And Dylan's map shows the complexities, both where the dam was removed, releasing the reservoir like at the Elwha, but also the inset map shows in the next map shows where the river was choked at the mouth and where the sediment had to be carried to form islands, kind of mimicking pre-colonial islands in that area. And I saw this whole question of sediment as kind of like an allegory, that in transforming society or healing ourselves, we have to deal with a lot of crap that's released, just like sediment behind a dam when a watershed is healed. But we can take that sediment and put it somewhere safe. And so this is a story also that has a leader, Chief Johnny Jackson, who was a revered leader of the Cascade tribe of the Yakima Nation, and an in lieu fishing site. He passed away this year. And this is some artwork by Milo Nauman of a Chinook salmon, and really how tenacious the tribes have been in trying to stay in place on the river itself. The next story is a bit complex, of the Nooksack and White watersheds, removal to restoration by Reno Buchanan and Milo Nauman. And this compares dam stories in 3 watersheds in Point Elliott Treaty Territory, east of the Sailor Sea. The first is the Middle Nooksack Dam near Bellingham, which has been removed at the longtime urging of the Nooksack and Lummi tribes. And this is a success story as shown in Reno's map. The before and after photos, before and after dam removal, and Milo's art of the tribal log jams that are being installed on the Nooksack. The second story is of the Green River, which flows into the Duwamish, and there the Howard H. Hansen Dam to control flooding is one of the worst fish blocking dams, making the Green one of the most endangered in North America. And Reno's map, the inset map, shows the complex story of the flood-prone White River, which once flowed into the Green River to the Duwamish, but actually jumped into the Puyallup watershed in a flood event. And the Mud Mountain Dam on the White and Muckleshoot ceded territory is one of the world's tallest, and also has horrific fish kills. The only real success story in that area is the next slide, the Buckley Fish Passage, which has also had a terrible reputation, but there an alliance of Muckleshoot, Puyallup, and stakeholders is building a new fish passage just this year. So some hope that there might be, on the next slide, that there might be some future success in bringing back the salmon to the upper reaches of the White. And then the Deschutes estuary, which is right in Olympia, in the ceded territory of the Squaxin Island tribe. Griffin Hart and Tierra McCarty addressed this in a very in-depth way. Griffin's text talks about the historical presence of Squaxin and other tribes in the Deschutes villages on Bud Inlet. Tumwater was the first American settlement in Washington Territory because of the falls and the water, and displaced the tribe from their village. There was a huge shell midden by Percival Landing, and removed them to the island reservation displacement. Bud Island was dredged for the port. Fishing rights were severely restricted. Billy Frank Jr. himself was arrested at the dam. And Griffin's map still shows the old 1873 channels, which you can still see at low tide. The Fifth Avenue Dam in 1951 later created Capitol Lake to reflect the Capitol and its waters. And that's created a toxic pool with invasives. The next map shows kind of a blown up area that shows the Fifth Avenue Dam and Capitol Lake, which is kind of contrasted to Olympia's pure water that made it famous. In the next slide, the artesian well, where you can still get pure water, but not in Capitol Lake. So Olympia's downtown growth displaced a number of Chinatowns and removed, and in 1941 burned the Little Hollywood shantytown, where a lot of Black, Indigenous, other people of color were living. That's where Heritage Park is today. And that was to make way for Capitol Lake. So there's this history of numerous displacements. And of course, today, the displacement of homeless encampments and creating a landscape of white supremacy. So to push back on this, in that very place, the Festivals of the Deschutes was held a few years ago that brought tribal canoes, Taboo from the Black Eyed Peas for dam removal, Billy Frank's son, Willie, and also further upriver. Tierra's map shows how the Capital Land Trust is purchasing tracts farther upriver to restore farmland, prevent erosion, and help the salmon come to the upper reaches of the river.
And so the next chapter is about the Chehalis watershed, and the title of the chapter is Lifeblood of the People. This chapter was written by Ashes Gleason, Mike Crosby, and James Martinez. This chapter focuses on the stories of the Chehalis and the Quinault tribes and their efforts to protect the Chehalis River. They found that communities surrounding the river have suffered from major flooding, especially in the 1933 and the 2007 floods. And so you can see the image up here of this whole town being flooded by the river. They found that these floods are largely caused by logging and development. The story is unique because it focuses on a new dam proposal that will aid in flood control. And you can see the diagram here on the bottom right. The Chehalis, Quinault, and Governor Inslee all oppose the dam because it threatens the annual spring Chinook run. There are alternative studies happening today that propose solutions which would be less detrimental to salmon runs. The Chehalis Basin Project is studying more holistic ways to release water in the upper stretches to prevent lowland flooding, like the Tulalip Beaver Project. And these are some of the pieces that were created by Ashes Gleason that honor the Chehalis tribal members. This is a salmon that's painted on a drum. And this next piece represents how we really need to protect Mother Earth, and that this is a comment on the issues related to the sea level rising. And so the next, ironically, the next chapter tells a very different story about a watershed that does not have enough water to share. And so this is a chapter that focuses on the Klamath, titled Sacred Waters Obstructed by an Iron Gate. This chapter was written by Parker Wong and Nathan Epstein. This chapter focuses on the stories of the Klamath, the Yurok, and Hoopa tribes and their efforts to collaborate with other organizations to protect the waters of the Klamath River. Across Northern California and Southern Oregon, the Klamath, Yurok, and Hoopa tribes united with fishers and environmentalists to reserve enough water in the river to protect the habitat of their suckers and the salmons. And so, ironically, this created droughts for farms and farm companies, and then farmers convinced President Bush to divert water from the river to the farms again. And these these illustrations here really tell that story. And so, when they diverted that water from the river, it created this huge fish kill that you see on the left side. And then, of course, when they left the water in the river, you see that these dried up mud flats, ruined the farmlands, and was very detrimental to the farming companies and the farmers. And so they found that this scenario benefited neither sides long term. So both the sides negotiated to agree to form an alliance to remove 4 dams on the Klamath to help restore water for both fish and farms. This provides an excellent example that although they may not see eye to eye from each of their perspectives and circumstances, they knew that they needed to work together to protect their sacred waters. And this is a great photograph that Nathan took of the mouth of the Klamath River. And then up here you see this great piece that Parker Wong created that honors the weaving designs of the Hupa and the Yurok people. And some more excellent illustrations on how these dams, it was important that they need to be removed.
The Columbia Snake Basin, I don't think people are unaware of this, has many hydroelectric dams. The red areas on this map, salmon no longer have access because of the dams to the upper reaches of the river. So this is a historic fishing area. This is Celilo Falls, or Wyam, which was inundated by the Dells Dam, flooded in 1957. On the next slide, you can see how this is such an important area. The interior, the plateau region, is an important cultural area that's semi-arid, and yet people have based their cultures on the salmon. And some of the petroglyphs, when the falls and those areas were inundated, had to be relocated. Lillian Pitt, when she spoke to our class, talked about this one, She Who Watches. The next slide shows Hassani Patterson's art of the northern leopard frog, representing the many species at stake when it comes to the dams along the river. And Megan Richards' map on the next slide shows the 4 lower river snake dams that allow only limited fish passage, but a huge alliance of Columbia River tribes, Nez Perce, Umatilla, Warm Springs, and Yakima, together with fishing groups, environmental groups, have long worked for the breaching the earthen portions of the river. Farmers and ranchers, on the next slide, have opposed the removal because they barge goods to the market on the reservoir pools. And like Bush and the Klamath, Presidents Clinton and Trump sided with the farmers. But during our class, Idaho Republican Congressman Mike Simpson proposed a $34 billion solution to finance dam breaching while compensating developing those communities. So the Columbia Basin Initiative is an exciting opportunity that would overcome the conflicts between the people of the land. And so we have incredible possibilities in both the Snake and the Klamath. The Snake was declared yesterday by American Rivers to be the #1 endangered river in the entire country.
In our final chapter is about the Pacific Coast, and it's titled Waiting for Chinook. This chapter was written by Carson Banas, Jennifer Brewer, and Andrew Williamson. And this chapter focuses on the stories of the Quinault, Quileute, and Makah tribes and their efforts to protect the Pacific Ocean, the beaches, and the watersheds. And so in their research, they learned about the Snake River dams and other blockages that adversely affect salmon migrations, which in turn affect our local resident orcas, as well as the coastal fishing communities in the Pacific Northwest. And this is an excellent example of what a success story would be when the Chinook salmon are returned and into healthy migrations that would ultimately benefit the orcas. And that's what's depicted in this image. And so if the reducing salmon population wasn't enough to bring orca populations to near extinction, this chapter also tells a story of other burdens on orcas, like naval exercises, ship and jet noises, as well as toxic chemicals. This chapter also focuses on how climate change is affecting salmon and how the ocean acidification is affecting shellfish. They conclude that there are enough burdens to the interconnected life of the Pacific Ocean and local watersheds without the destructive effects caused by dams. And so we would really like to finish this presentation with the voices of some of our students that worked on the book.
Alex, what was the most significant piece of this project for you all, Vanessa, Madeline, and Tristan? At what point in your work did you feel you had put a piece of your heart into your work? Nice question.
For me, it was through the artwork. Learning about Northwest Coast formline and Coast Salish art was really different because throughout my education, the art history that I learned was very Eurocentric. So getting to make art is inspired, not exactly Northwest Coast formline, but inspired by the people. That was the most significant part for me.
For me, I feel like when I first thought of making a map, I didn't think it was as not only difficult, but I didn't think it was as I can't think of a good word to describe it, but it tells a story, and you don't realize that when you just look at a map of say just Washington State when you're trying to go to Google Maps and you want to go to McDonald's or whatever. You don't think of that map. But like when I was making this map, I realized not only am I making this map, but I need to tell a story with this map, and the viewer needs to be able to tell why the watershed restoration is important and why the story of the Nisqually watershed and estuary restoration was a landmark in the Pacific Northwest. And I feel like part of my heart went into it when I realized that I wasn't just making a map, I was telling a story. And so I think that was when I realized that. And it took me almost a month into the project to kind of realize that, even though we had talked about it before. But yeah, and even though I technically finished it last quarter, still working on it now, which is fun. Developing it further is definitely something that is interesting to me, and I like adding to it just because I find Illustrator fun now. Before it was just like, oh, it's just work, but now that I know how to use it, now that I know how to work it a lot better than I did before, I think I kind of use it as a way to just kind of like express my learning into the map.
For me, this was a hard project. I've never done maps, and to go out of my comfort zone, I felt like wanting to give up a couple times, that I wasn't good enough to be able to complete this project or do it the justice that it needs. And so now for me, learning the things I learned about their climate issues, dams, the restoration, when I look at Mashell River or when I go to Ohop Creek, which is down the road from my house, I see a lot more. My eyes are open more. I have a better understanding as to why those trees are there, why that log jam is there, why those rocks are there. Just gives me a more open mind more knowledge, but also I know that my friends down on the reservation or my family are going to see this. And so it was a personal goal to just kind of stay with it and stay committed. I relied on my teammates a lot to help get me through this, and I cannot thank them enough for everything that they've done. So thank you.
I was 100% out of my comfort zone. I mean, writing is always a struggle, but to have to really think about what you're writing and put very important information in such a small space, you really have to think about what you're putting in and what's important. And it feels really good to be in school and to be working on something that's has meaning and purpose, and not just endless papers that I'm going to end up deleting or burning later. The people that I came into contact that helped with this project outside of our group, they're really excited about it, and they're super excited to be able to help distribute it and get it out into the world. And that's a really exciting thought. I look forward to kind of seeing like what type of impact this has.
Yeah, to echo Ash's there, it feels like this project is like not just like an assignment or anything, it's like an actual like resource. And I mean, the people that I've showed it to are really excited about it. And I mean, all the projects turned out really fantastic, and excited to really like look at all of them in detail once the whole thing is published. I really liked to be able to use InDesign. I've never used that, but I'm familiar with like other like Photoshop and Illustrator, but that one like really is really going to be helpful for me because I do a lot of like DIY publishing stuff. And I mean, some of the things that I've been trying to pull off, this program has just made it like that much easier. So I really was appreciative.
I think I talked about it a little bit during our presentation yesterday, but I just feel very, very fortunate not to only work with my teammates, James and Ashes, but our learning community in this class was awesome. You know, coming in, I think the first week, I thought I was a little bit overwhelmed with coming into a two-part class, and but I overcame those things very quickly. I think you guys were very, very informative. And I think like some of, you know, the other students in here had mentioned that it was very welcoming and very open-minded. And I think that you and Alex set that precedence. And then the other thing, you know, that I think is really, really important is that everybody that was a part of this, you know, there's people that will never get to experience or be a part of what we've done in their entire life. So, you know, to be able to do that during all of the distractions that we have and all the crazy stuff going on is amazing in itself. And, you know, I'm truly grateful. You know, like I told Alex, you know, I only had 4 credits for me to graduate. And, you know, they're like, why do you want to take a 16 credit class? I said, well, it's something that's always interested me. And, you know, I think possibly maybe my last class at Evergreen, you know, why not go out with a bang? And I had really no idea that it was going to, you know, have this type of magnitude or effect on me. And I've taken some pretty great classes at Evergreen. But this is truly, you know, something that I will never, ever forget. And it ends, you know, my time at Evergreen with something that I can always look at.